and I'm applying for the Master's in Teaching program with a special ed endorsement. And these are my friends Philip and Adam, and I asked them to be a part of the conversation because they both had experiences in the education system that I thought were relevant. So first I'll have them introduce themselves, and then we'll get to the nitty-gritty and ask the question about race.
I'm Philip, and Jamie and I went to college together, and we worked at the same after-school enrichment program for a few years in a school that was racially diverse, and most of the students were below the poverty line. And so...
In Tacoma.
In Tacoma, right.
And I'm Adam, and I work with Jamie here at Holden Village. But I have been an elementary music teacher for the last 3 years in a small town in Wisconsin that was a pretty homogeneous Caucasian community.
So the question is about the responsibility that teachers and schools have to talk to kids about race and racism and what that might mean, and the dangers of discrimination. And so I'll start, I guess, with my experience in Tacoma at this school. Was kind of the most recent, and so I'll talk from there. During my year, I interacted with students who came from a variety of backgrounds. Many were below the poverty line, and a lot of migrant children were in my school, a lot with different learning styles, and so it was a unique classroom to work in, and many times I felt like I couldn't always relate because I came from a very privileged background, but one thing I realized was that especially in terms of their diverse situation, the kids were in tune to what was going on, and to what was going on in their neighborhood, how their parents were interacting with their friends' parents, and whether that be across racial lines. They were very aware of that, and so I could ask questions, but most of the time I didn't even have to ask. I was approached, and kids wanted to talk to me about what things meant, and sometimes if something was confusing or discussion would happen. And so I think the responsibility of a school and teacher in a classroom in Parkland, for example, would be to recognize the realities of that community, and be willing to take time out from whatever might be going on and have conversations with students honestly. And so, and I'm not sure which the best way to approach students at different ages would be, but I think relating to them on individual levels, whether it be on the playground, if there's a fight between kids, and talking to those two kids specifically about why this might have happened, or what feelings, whether they're positive or negative, are, there, is important. And so kind of just learning alongside the students as well, and kind of having real conversations with them from their context.
What age were your students, just out of curiosity?
I worked with second graders.
Okay.
And so they were at an age where they're very aware of how their teacher is relating to them and wanting to, do well and behave, but also we're coming from backgrounds that was evident in how they were in the classroom. And I think a teacher has to realize that their role is more than teaching this math lesson in 20 minutes and passing the test, because kids bring so much to the classroom that is more than just that. And so I don't have the answers, but I hope that if I was a teacher in a diverse school, I would bring an attitude that would be willing to learn and ask questions and prompt discussions that would hopefully enlarge worldviews and encourage equality and understanding.
Yeah.
So.
Philip, you worked at the same school. Did
Yeah.
you have like a similar experience, would you say?
Well, Jamie did more like with classroom, and
Okay.
my program was just like one-on-one tutoring with other students doing the same thing.
Okay.
And there was a lot of racial diversity among the students, but not among the college students who were doing the tutoring.
Okay.
And so that was an interesting thing that we had to talk about in our training, was how do you deal with the knowledge that these kids have had these experiences that you've never had, or that they've had to think about these things that you don't have to think about on a day-to-day basis. And a few of my students over the years were Mexican and Spanish speaking, and their families only spoke Spanish, and it was kind of interesting to see the different sort of cliques that would form among the kids, and how teachers dealt with that even in the halls, and luckily it seemed like a pretty positive environment at this school, but there were some times where there would be kids that were singled out, and you'd think, is it because of their race, and is that a factor into why these teachers are treating them differently or more harshly?
Did you think it was a race thing?
Especially with one student, yeah. But I don't know. I think it's really important for teachers and educators and facilitators and helpers of any kind to like really be, like Jamie said, aware that it's not just about the lesson, but it's it's different people coming with different sort of stories and baggage or whatever it is, and trying to like foster a healthy community.
I would say in my fairly limited experience in teaching 3 years, that human curriculum side, like the social curriculum is the more challenging side to teach in a lot of ways, but it's the most important part to teach, because if people don't get that, they can't really get the rest of, I mean, if there are huge problems occurring with race or with bullying in the classroom, nobody can really focus on math. So you've got to, it's something that has to be dealt with.
Did you ever have to talk to a group of students like blatantly about race, or how did you deal with those topics that would be more of the human side?
I would say music affords the opportunity to talk about lots of different culture, which is something I enjoy. A specific racial instance, we always study African American music, because it's a huge part of American music, as well as Native American music and other things. But I remember specifically teaching a spirituals unit to third graders, and reading the book, Follow the Drinking Gourd, and then we sang the song. And I was surprised that few third graders knew anything about like our racial history in the United States. They didn't really know a lot about slavery, didn't really know about how different people had been treated over time, and were kind of horrified, I would say, about how people were treated, and they would say things like, "Well, that's not right. They can't do that." So I think they had a basic, racial knowledge that it's important to treat people equally. But then I think bringing it to today can be harder in a lot of ways than talking about past instances, just because they do hit closer to home.
Yeah, and you said you taught at a predominantly white
predominantly white school. So we had some Hispanic kids, a few black students, but not many at all, probably 95% white. And so students didn't have a lot of experience interacting with people that, of different races. And so I think in that way, it's even more important that the teacher talks about race. If it's in the news or something, there's racial issues occurring. It's so important to bring that into the classroom, especially if it's pertinent to anything that you're talking about.
And even just history, we even in college we read this book in one of my classes called The Debt, what America owes to blacks, and it talked a lot about how all the historical important founding fathers and everyone is a white person, and like, what about all of the other? I mean, it's an educator's job essentially. I think it's a responsibility to teach about these other other perspectives,
and that's so true in music too. I mean, we're predominantly studying like Western music, and I mean, you talk about all these composers, and they're all men pretty much until recently, and they're all white, and
so and who our history has been written by,
right? Exactly. But that's
men.
not all of history. There's a lot of
So finding different avenues to talk about.
Yeah, and I think kids are open to that.
Yeah,
it can be scary, I think, for teachers to kind of open that can of worms at times, especially coming from a Caucasian privileged background. And I grew up in a town where there wasn't, a lot of racial diversity either, and went to a college that honestly was fairly white as well. Yeah. So I think I have some worry myself, but I think that can't stop me from going there.
Right.
Yeah.
And kids tend to surprise me, like when you open this can of worms that you're kind of hesitant about. I mean, kids will say stuff how it is, and how they feel, and most of the time, a really good conversation can come out of it.
Yeah. And
they're more in tune then.
Right, and I think one important thing that teachers can do, especially in the moment, is to acknowledge like racial instances that happen in school, like or anything like bullying, like bullying girls and boys and or whatever, and just bringing it up as it happens, like this is not acceptable, and making sure that you don't let comments slide just
because you don't have time.
Right, because you don't have time, and we've got to.
Neither do we.
We're out of time.
Oh,
thank you, Adam and Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you, CLU.